So welcome back to Moorland's Juneteenth and Genealogy program. This is episode 2. We are here today with Brother Alafia Bailey, and I'll have him introduce himself. So, who are you?
Peace, y'all. My name is Alafia Bailey. I'm a Moorland-Spingarn research intern, the Moorland Scholars. Currently a senior at Howard as well. Finna graduate real soon. From Houston, Texas, right? My mother, because this is part of me as well, who I am. Connection with genealogy. So my mother's, her name is Janice Bailey. Main name is Phil, y'all, from Jasper, Texas, which is East Texas, 2 hours away from Louisiana, right? And my father is Frederick Bailey. He's from Houston, Texas, Acres Home, Texas, right? And yeah, so that's who I am. Student here, I play baseball here as well at Howard University. Yeah, so that's a little bit who I am.
And what do you do at Moorland-Spingarn?
So right now, like I said, I'm an archivist intern. Right now, processing the athletic division of Howard University athletics, and just helping out around, help curate certain events and programs such as Juneteenth and Genealogy. Yeah, so that's like the main things right now in the archive. So yeah.
All right. So, what does genealogy mean to you?
So what does genealogy mean to me is, I think just in simple terms, because I go back to thinking about the griot, you know what I mean, and the jolly come out of West Africa, right, and which means the person that is like the keeper of the history, but also like the blood, you know what I mean, and so when I think of genealogy, like from African American perspective, is really keeping and tracing the blood of our ancestors, you know what I mean, and keeping that history and telling the stories of the blood and what we, endured, who we are, how we flowed, through this society, how we became, you know what I'm saying, and where our blood is right now, is all about genealogy. But you have certain genealogists in your family. Some might have some might not. But one day you could be one if your family doesn't have one, right? So yeah, I see genealogy, as the stories and really the blood of, one's family for real. So that's what I think of when I think of genealogy.
That's a beautiful, account for what that word really means and how it kind of touches each and every one of us individually. So in that same breath, tell us about your family's blood, your family's memory, the story of your family's history.
Yeah, so yeah, it gets real deep. So I'll first start off with my my father's side, right? So my last name is Bailey, right? So it's interesting because even when you go into genealogy and when you look into it, it's important to like research names and understand the meanings of certain things. So Bailey, I think it means like bailiff from a Anglo-French perspective or like language, like the meaning of that means like bailiff. So when I think of Bailey, I'm thinking of it's a European last name, right? And since it has like Anglo-French origins, so I'm thinking about which societies, or which colonial like governments and states came into America and conquered, right? And I'm thinking about, okay, I'm just thinking like, okay, so I just wonder what part of America, my people was probably enslaved at, right? So but I never really knew until I got into my genealogy research, what I'll begin to get into in a minute. But in terms of my father's side, right? So one day I was talking to my grandmother, and I was like, "Hey, grandma, what you know about your husband's, last name and his family?" Right? And he passed away real early, I think in 1970s, right? And she's widowed, right? Still living. My grandmother, Eleanor Bailey, right? Her maiden name is Johnson, and her husband name is J.B. Bailey, right? So there, I know my grandmother's from Montgomery, Texas, and I think he is from Houston, Texas specifically, right? I might be wrong, but I gotta go back and check. So yeah, so we got the Bailey last name, J.B. Bailey. So I asked my grandmother, I'm like, "Hey, grandma, what you know about your husband?" She was like, "Alafia, I really don't know nothing. I never met his father." You know what I'm saying? I was like, "Dang, for real, grandma?" So my grandma, she goes and says, "Yeah, I never met my husband's father before, so I really don't know too much history of Alafia." So I'm like, "All right, grandma, I'm gonna do you some good, ancestral work, and some, good, works, and just do that for you, so you know who your people is, right?" So I go on ancestry.com, and I type in J.B. Bailey and Eleanor Bailey, which are my grandparents, and I find their marriage record, find some census their names in the census papers. So I go and look for J.B. Bailey's father, and I find him, and his name was J.B. Bailey as well. So I found him, and then I'm looking for J.B. Bailey in the early census as well. And then I found his father, right, which would be my great-great-grandparent. And I found him on the census paper, and I found his wife, Viola Bailey. And the way I found his wife was on the World War II draft card, right? So that's how I found his wife, and that's how I solidified and found out that was his my grandfather's grandfather, right, J.B. Bailey. And his name was Jim. So I asked my grandma, I was like, "So what did JB stand for?" She was like, "Oh, JB either stands for like Jim or like James." I was like, "Okay, so that's interesting." And I'm like, while I'm doing the research on the side, I'm going back to my grandma to like solidify names that she know of, like siblings, aunties, and uncles, and everything I'm hitting on, she like know about, right? And the siblings and things like that, and like grandparents' names, but she really never like met most of these people. But she knows about with stories, things like that. So I'm solidifying everything with her. So it was interesting. So when I found JB's grandfather, my grandfather's grandfather, right, Jim Bailey, I found a record that said it was a arrest record in the early 1900s, like 1901, and it was an arrest record in, I think it was in Walker County, Texas, and he got arrested for quote unquote stealing cattle, right? And he pleaded not guilty, right? And during them times, really like post slavery, like during like Jim Crow, or like even like black code laws, black people really targeted white people were trying to arrest black people to get them back into slavery, you know what I mean, in the convict like leasing like system, right? So and that was one of the things I felt like he was affected by, but he's pleaded not guilty. And also a lot of black men on the census paper for this arrest record pleaded not guilty as well for certain things. And most of the things you will see were like stealing, like robbery, just certain things, but like nothing like crazy. It was just like small, like either like petty crimes or like something that you would like never really think of, right? So I see that on the record, and I'm looking for his race, and it says he was mulatto, right? I was like, oh, this is interesting. So he was mulatto, and then he had blue eyes. And I was like, what? But it also stated his wife's name, Viola Bailey. I was like, oh, so this is actually my great grandfather. So it all makes sense. So I was like, okay, so it's interesting. But it said on that record, it had place of birth for him, which was Texas, and then it said father's birth and mother's birth, and it also had his birth, which was in 1874. So he's a first child born like right after slavery, but he's mulatto, and his father was born in Louisiana. So I'm like, So to backtrack with the meaning of the Bailey last name, okay, French Anglo, Louisiana, colonized by the French. So I was like, So this is interesting. So it's kind of making sense a little bit. So the first thing I did, like whenever you see, somebody born in like the 1870s, because black people, you really see like a splurge and like a lot of black people on the 1870 census. I'm not saying you won't see black people on the census before 1870s, but this is the first time you see like black people, a lot of black people on the 1870 census, because this is like post-slavery, right? So I'm looking back, and the way to go look for other black people before the 1870 census is either the slave schedules or the other census, because you got some free black folk in those census, right? But the first thing I did was go look in the 1870 census. I went to go look in the slave schedules, and I typed in Bailey, Louisiana. The slave schedule. On the slave schedule, it has the slave masters' names and like the number of slaves, right? So I'll go in, type in Louisiana to go find his father, to see if his father was enslaved at all. So I go in Louisiana, type in Bailey, and the first thing I see is New Orleans slave owner J.B. Bailey. And I was like, my mind was like blown. So I'm like, okay, to me this kind of makes sense, right? And then he owned 4 slaves, 2 mulatto women, and I think 2 black men. And I was like, man, so something, had to went down. Somebody was exploited and things like that. And I personally think the owner was probably his father, which like hinted to him being mulatto. And yeah. So I'm still searching like to solidify that. Actually, yesterday was trying to go into the New Orleans archives to go see, like to call up and like research online to see about the J.B. Bailey plantation, Ward 11, New Orleans, and things like that, to see if it's like the correct information and stuff like that. So which I'm still doing. So like that's how far I got back on my father's side, right? And it's a whole different story on my mother's side, just to go through it kind of quickly, right? So my mother, Janice Filial, she like I said, born in Jasper, Texas, right? So mind you, Texas didn't become a state until 1845, right? 20 years before slavery ended in Texas, Juneteenth. And this is really interesting, history, because most people who came either enslaved in Texas were already enslaved there, from Mexico, or they came from like Mississippi, Louisiana, South Carolina, and the people, who owned those people in like South Carolina, Mississippi, Louisiana, like once Texas became a state, they went to go get more land in Texas, and they brought the slaves over, right? So that's just a little history. So my mother's side, I was really curious just to find out. I was like, man, this is really interesting, right? So come to find out, I have an auntie. Her name is Aunt Diane, and we call her Aunt Di. Really cool, shout out to the elders. This is my mother's sister-in-law, right? And she is married to my Uncle Gene, right? He's the oldest child on my mother's side, right? So Aunt Di has did all the genealogy of my family, like literally all the way to the 1790s, right? So I go to her and I'm like, hey, have you did any genealogy work on the family? She's like, oh, if you look at the whole ancestry account, I done found everything, boy. Here you go. I'm like, oh, man, like this is a blessing. You know what I mean? So she's like the, like quote unquote the griot, the jolly of the family. You know what I mean? And I'm just really like learning under her about from my family side. She's the one, it's like keeping me going as well, right? So she showing me the whole line and things like this. I'm like, oh wow. Like I said, she went back all the way to 1790. She found the brother named James Farrell, who was brought on a boat from Africa. You know what I mean? He was born in 1790, but he was listed on an 1870 census in Jasper, Texas. But it said he's born in Africa, parents from Africa, which meant that he was, brought over. But mind you, the quote unquote, like legally the last slave ship to come over to America was 1808. And if you did that, like afterwards, it was illegal, but they still smuggled Africans, right, over past 1808. So I'm thinking he was probably around like, he was a teenager probably when he came over to, if he was captured as an African coming to the United States, James Farrell, right? So so in terms with Jasper, Texas, right? My mama's side, Filial. So Filial is really interesting. It's a deep history with the Filial last name, Fillyaw. It's French as well, right? And so with this last name, Filial side, because on my mother's side we got the Filials, we got the Adams, got Renfros, we got Brumleys, things like that, right? Really deep history in Jasper. And the Filial, so my mother's father name is Houston Filial, which is my grandfather, right? And Houston Filial's father, which is my great grandfather, is Jenkins Filial, right? And Jenkins Filial married Mama Fady, which is her maiden name is Fady Brumley, right? And my mother's mother, Thelma, she's a Renfro, right? And her mother is a Adams, and her father is a Renfro as well. And that's all in Jasper, right? So with the Filial line, right? So one day I was just asking questions. You know what I mean? I kind of did the research a little bit with the Filial line, and I'm just asking questions because, like, once you do the genealogy work on paper, you got to go back and like get the oral history from your elders in the community. So I go back, back home to Jasper during Thanksgiving break, and I'm asking around like, "Hey, what y'all know about the Filial last name? Like, what y'all know? What y'all know?" And one of my cousins, he was like, "Hey, Laf, 15 minutes down the road, it's a Filial prison, it's Filial schools, it's Filial stores." I'm like, "Oh, this, do we own it? This our people?" And he was like, "Hey, Laf, they all white. These white Filials 15 minutes down the road." And I said, "What?" So, I think that should say enough about, Filial last name really in East Texas. And that's really the main place you can find Filials. But so I trace back, you know what I'm saying? Because the story's really deep, but I trace back. It's a lot of oral stories I'm still trying to confirm with that story. But it's white Filials 15 minutes down the road. And apparently we're related in some ways, you know what I'm saying? And in terms of like slave owners and just like, deep history, right? So yeah, but that's the thing, we ain't know about it. You know what I mean? Well, I personally ain't know about it. Some people in our family did, but that's history that, that's, swept under because it's so deep. But you see that a lot when it comes to genealogy and black people, that like you might meet some, white people with your last name that probably like owns your people, you know what I mean, or just has some type of connection to your family. So that's like a really interesting history as well. That black people, it's like reality for black people, you know what I'm saying? But so yeah, the Filial last name got some interesting history for sure. And then the Adams last name that's rooted in Jasper, Texas as well. There's a book I got out from St. Kofa that I ordered. It was by the WPA, which WPA went out in the 1930s to go get live interviews from enslaved Africans who were formerly enslaved. And there's like a Texas narrative book, I think volume 2 that I got, that spoke about the Adams, the Adam plantation, and talked about that as like part of one of the worst plantations in Jasper, Texas. And with that, and also the Renfros, still doing research on that. Renfro is my grandmother's father's last name, right? And they're deep in Jasper as well. So yeah, so like, just the whole thing with my family history on my mama's side, it runs real deep. You know what I'm saying? in terms of the Fayette Renfros and Adams and also the Brumleys, right? So just a little interesting fact connected to James Farrell all the way back to me, right? So like I said, so you got me, you got my mother, my mother's grandmother is Fady Brumley, right? So Mama Fady mother is Beulah Rhymes, right? And Beulah Rhymes is originally a Brumley, and because Beulah's mother is Frances Brumley, but Frances Brumley married Rhymes, and Frances Brumley and Willie Rhymes were both enslaved in Morehouse Parish, Louisiana, right? And this is my great grandfather and grandmother, right? And they moved to Jasper, Texas, and he was actually got interviewed by the WPA in the 1930s, and it was, you know, it was documented, things like that. I kind of got his script right here. I'm gonna read it in a minute, just a little bit of it. So that just goes back to him. And Francis Brumley, grandfather, our father is Farrell, is James Farrell, James Brumley, the one that was brought from Africa to Jasper, Texas. You know what I'm saying? He was born in 1790, and you see in the 1870 census, and he had a daughter, or his grandchild, Frances Brumley. Then Frances Brumley married Willie Rhymes, right? And then Willie Rhymes, Frances Brumley had Beulah Rhymes. She's also Brumley. And then Beulah Rhymes had Mama Fady, right? And Mama Fady had my grandfather Houston, right? And then Papa Houston had my mother, and then my mother had me. You know what I mean? So that's just like, this is a little line of the people, right? So it's also interesting, my family history. So one thing about us, when it comes to, like, you know, just family culture and preservation, we always eat, you know, homemade biscuits and sugar syrup, right? And I always wondered, like, why? You know what I'm saying? And this past month, I went back home from my cousin's graduation, and I was asking my elders in the community about just more family history and things like that. And my uncle had told me that, hey, Alafia, did you know that there was a syrup mill on our land that we got right now? And I was like, it was a syrup mill? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, Uncle James, that kind of makes sense of why we, you know, love syrup. He was like, yeah, it was all sugar cane. That whole thing was sugar cane. And I just wondered, you know, my people was probably, you know, sowing in the crops of like sugar cane, you know what I mean, on that field that we got. And the land we got right now was owned by the Renfros on my grandma's side, right? So it just made me think about, you know, what they endured and what they went through. It was probably, you know, related to sugar cane all the way to today. And we love, you know, sugar syrup, because the syrup mill probably in the back all connected to what we love right now. You know, just a little family history with that. So just a little excerpt from Willie Rhymes' narrative from the WPA Texas Slave Narratives. It says, Willie Rhymes of Bevelport is a short, fat old man nearing his 84th birthday. He is 5 feet 4 inches in height and weighs 175 pounds. His mother was part white, but his father pure Negro. Because of his poor health, he has not been able to work for 10 years. It says, I was William Rhymes of Bevelport. I was born in Morehouse Parish, Louisiana, September 11th, 1853. You know what I mean? So he was born in slavery, Morehouse Parish, Louisiana. And Bevelport is literally right outside of Jasper, but they also moved to Jasper as well. So when I was reading this, I was like, because he's telling his story, things that, you know, he did and stuff like that. But he also expressed like his favorite food, you know. And this is interesting to read, because it's like part of the genealogy. When you find narratives, you find like connections about, and you find out connections about you. You find about yourself as well, and because like you are your ancestors, right? So he said in one of his excerpts about the things that he liked. Let me find it real quick. So he said, sometimes us ration get so low we runs at parched corn, but generally us had meat and bread and peas and turnip greens. I like sweet potatoes and gravy best of all. Grandmother was a weaver, and master's clothes on the loom. The little boys wore long shirts and the little girls wore slip dresses. You know what I mean? So he's like describing what he likes in terms of food and also just the people around him, right? But he said sweet potatoes. My family loves sweet potatoes, like candy yams. You know what I mean? So that was interesting. You know, when I read this and I sent this to my family, it was like, oh, Willie Rhymes, you know, he loves sweet potatoes. So it kind of made sense why we love, like, you know, sweet potatoes as well. So yeah, it's just a little, you know, little thing about family history on my mama's side and my dad's side. Really, really deep, you know, really, really interesting. Still doing research on it, but yeah, I think that goes into like who I am. You know what I'm saying? And my people endured and what we have. So yeah.
That's beautiful. Do you see a pattern with some of the things that your ancestors that you found out about, like the things that they did or the skills that they had, and maybe like patterns you see in your current and intermediate family that may have, like, you know, inherited certain skills, and like you were talking about the things that you like and foods and stuff like that? Do you see any of those connections with like the jobs that y'all take up in your family? Or
Not yet. So because my father, he works for the railroad, and my grandfather, Papa Houston, he log wood. You know what I mean? He haul wood and stuff like that. So like a little bit, you know what I mean? But we like we own a lot of, you know, a lot of stuff and like land, you know what I mean? Like interesting, you know, with the cattle thing, with the Baileys, you know what I mean? And because I do wonder what he was doing in the jobs that he was doing during that time, and also just like his character. So I don't know too much about the Bailey side because I'm still doing the research on it. But in terms of like, you know, the fee outside, or even just like the Rick Rose Adams and the Rhymes, just from what I know, like our people was always like hardworking, you know, people, you know what I mean, who stayed together and commune together. Because even when you read William Rhymes' narrative, he talks about how he had like so many kids and he was always together, and they always, you know, like stuff that he liked to eat, you know what I mean, and that like they moved together after slavery, you know, to Bevelport, to Jasper, and they always stuck together. That's one big thing that like how we are as a family, you know, like community is huge, you know what I mean. So to read those words from my enslaved ancestor, to see that today, you know what I mean, it's like a huge connection that I see for sure.
That's beautiful. So what's the most interesting thing that you found in your search from maybe like the time you started up until now?
Man, the most interesting thing?
Or like shocking. Like what was the most shocking thing you found?
Shocking? I would have to say that when I found my like Willie Rhymes narrative, I was like, wow, I got words from an enslaved ancestor. Like I could literally see his words and him describing, you know, where he is and where he at. You know what I'm saying? It was like like whoa, like this is huge. You know what I'm saying? That for sure. And also I think the Bailey last name, you know, discovery and the plantation, and that being New Orleans was a huge thing as well. I was like, you know, for you to see J.B. Bailey, and because Jim Bailey and J.B. Bailey is all through my grandfather's names, and then to see the first person after slavery name is Jim, and then his son J.B., and then you see a J.B. Bailey on the slave schedule, it's like, dang, you know what I mean? That was crazy. But some people don't find things like that easily. You know what I mean? Because genealogy sometimes it can be hard to search and find certain things to add on to your, you know, family tree. But for that to be in my face like that, man, to me that was crazy for sure. That was crazy.
So with the work that all that genealogy kind of encompasses is very ancestral, and with that, it can be a lot. Like it can be very intense, especially given the history as African people, as people who were subjected to dehumanization and becoming a commodity. So what advice would you give to people who are interested in finding their ancestors through Ancestry.com or through, just talking with they people, the griots and their family. What best advice would you give someone who is interested in this line of reclaiming memory, family memory?
Take your time, because it's been so many times where I was on like a hard search for my ancestors, then come across some things where I just like, all right, I'm just gonna breathe. You know what I'm saying? So just take your time and just know it's okay to take your time. Family Search is a big website that's free to use when it comes to finding your people. Understand the history that was happening during the times when you find certain records. You know what I mean? Like, say, like the 1870 census, like I said. You know what I mean? The first time black people was on there. Slave schedules, you know what I mean? It was the first time you see African American slaves documented on a government level. You know what I mean? And that goes to a 3/5 of person for, like, state rights and stuff like that. You might see things in the 1910s or like the early 1900s. You know what I mean? Like the American Revolution and just different laws. Just understand what was happening around the time so you get more context to build onto the story about your ancestors and what they was probably doing during that time. Right? It'll make it a little more, interesting. But yeah, talk to your elders in the community for sure. Videotape and document everything that they saying is a big thing, so you keep it for your generations that to come. But yeah, just keep on asking questions. Like, anytime you run into somebody from where you from, ask them a question about what they know. You know what I mean? Just always ask questions about certain things. When you go to, local bookstores, ask if they got, family history, genealogy books about your certain city or certain state. You know what I mean? That might have, history about your family inside of it. And, really just keep on asking questions about your people to the elders in your community will also really, really help. Like, go to the oldest person that you know, if you have access to them, because people might not have access to them, but the oldest person that you know, build that relationship, you know what I mean, to get the information so you can keep it and pass it along. So yeah.
Last thing, how has Moorland kind of influenced your passion for, uncovering your family history and encouraging other people to do the same?
So it was Moorland that got me on this, like, being in the archives, being connected to people, and it specifically was for my last interview, Brandon Nightingale, because I had lunch with him. He's telling me about his family history, and I'm like, bro, what? Like, how you find that? And after that, I ain't never stopped. You know what I mean? So you gotta understand, the archives is genealogy. Like, African American archives is genealogy. So it might be some stuff here that you probably don't know about. You come in and look at and find your family stuff. You know what I mean? Because African American archives tell a story. You know what I mean? And it's people with last names, you know what I mean, that has a family. You know what I'm saying? Which is like genealogy in the blood, right? So, like, Moorland is like a hub of, like, blood, right? That you could dive into and pick out what you need to move forward, right? Like, every archives at a HBCU, like, or the Schomburg or like the MLK Library, is a hub of, like, African blood. You know what I mean? That you could, like, go in and seek from to see to see if your family blood in here. You know what I mean? And Moorland for sure has, guided me. We have Texas resources here, genealogy resources, slave narratives as well that they have here. But even outside of that, like, just like books or like manuscripts. You know what I mean? I know E. Franklin Frazier did some research here as well with family history that was really, really good, that talked about people that came to Howard University, you know what I mean, and where they was from, that listed a lot of family history. So it's just a lot of resources that we have here that, like, everything we have here is connected to a family resource, you know what I mean? So it's in Moorland, it's a big help for that for sure. So yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Brother Alafia, for taking out time to really speak with us on a personal level, and on an encouragement level to the people who are interested in genealogy. So thank you for being with us, viewers, on our second episode of Juneteenth and genealogy. We hope to see you again for our third episode coming up very soon. So thank you.
Thank you.